Get the power to do more with Storable software. More automating, more control, more revenue, more time back in your day. Storable helps operators do more with the most powerful technology in self-storage. Learn more at storable.com/do more.
My name is Matthew Beal. I'm a senior product marketing manager here at Storable, and one common question I get is, what is a product marketing manager? And it's totally fair. From a very high level, essentially what my role is I want to make sure that I am constantly listening to everybody out there in the market, so everybody here that is attending, both our Storable clients and just prospects, folks that don't work with us, to understand a few different things. I want to understand kind of what's going on in the market, what are the broader market forces, what are we seeing in some parallel industries, some ones that are similar to storage, and what are some of the lessons that we can learn. And ultimately, I want to take all of that information and I want to make sure that Storable is creating the best possible technical solutions to help you guys address those things. So this webinar is really valuable to me. I always enjoy doing this because I do get to hear, again, through your guys' questions through the chat, what you guys are thinking, what of this resonates and what doesn't resonate. But most importantly, it also provides me a unique opportunity to kind of provide some of that stuff that I'm hearing from other folks back out to everybody else in this industry. And so I appreciate, just how kind of familial and communicative this industry is, and my role gets to be a big part of that. So appreciate you guys participating in this webinar and other forums. So I want to start with a high-level overview of what is this webinar series. So you probably noticed this is episode 4 of this webinar series. So we've been discussing quite a bit before today even. And so the idea behind this Do More webinar series is we want to be able to keep our finger on the pulse of the industry and understand what are the biggest market forces that our operators are having to address at any given time. And I want to start with a review of those, although we're going to dive deeper into one of these over the next couple of months. This first one is a tenant shift to digital. And so the idea here is, if you go back to March of 2020 or so, at the beginning of kind of the COVID-19 health crisis, I think you guys would all agree that we saw a massive surge in online usage. And part of that was just driven out of need, right? We had to create these contactless experiences that a lot of people hadn't had to do before, because all of a sudden everybody was quarantining and a lot of businesses were being shut down. And what's interesting though is that we saw a lot of tenants and a lot of operators moving over to these digital experiences, but those things have continued to persist. So even in this kind of post-vaccination world where things have started to open back up and businesses have started to open back up, we've continued to see an increased usage in digital. And so this is what we like to call kind of a pull forward effect. This was something we always expected to happen eventually in the storage industry. It just got pulled forward and it's happening sooner than we expected, and it's continued to increase at that pace. So it's super important from an operator perspective that you're thinking about this both from an internal operations POV, but also from your tenant experience, because as we'll go through here in just a moment, your tenants are demanding digital experiences. Number 2 is the supply crunch. And so the idea here is that we just don't have enough available inventory across the United States to meet the surge in tenant demand that we've seen over the last couple of years. A lot of folks during the COVID-19 health crisis expected in those early days that a bunch of people would move into storage, especially like students, for example. Excuse me. But what they didn't necessarily expect was that those folks weren't going to move out. I think I spoke to a lot of operators throughout the year 2021 where they were just shocked that people weren't moving out of their units and the demand continued to increase during that time. So it's led to this unique market dynamic where we're seeing pretty consistently 95+% occupancy percentages, and that's with people doing aggressive rate increases. People are still staying in. Number 3 is the labor shortage, and this affects the storage industry in 2 main ways. The first is that a lot of operators we're talking to are just struggling to find good talent at the rates that they've historically been able to offer for folks. And so there's just a lot of open roles that people can't necessarily fill. But I think the other one is a little bit more interesting in that there's a bunch of secondary effects, kind of downstream and upstream implications to this. The main one being kind of supply chain issues that we're seeing. And I think everyone's experiencing this in their personal lives for sure. Like, I know here in Austin, if you go to the grocery store, it's way more barren than I would expect in a lot of unique and unexpected ways. But in the storage industry in particular, this is affecting the construction pipeline. So on the supply crunch, just to go back to that for a minute, traditionally the playbook, if you start seeing facilities at 90% plus occupancy, you would expect for people to start building new facilities. It's pretty rational, pretty logical. The problem is that the cost of construction has become so high that folks aren't able to do that. So this is definitely impacting us kind of in a compounding way between those 2 factors. which leads us to our last one that also plays nicely into the previous two, which is growth via mergers and acquisitions. So if, as an operator, if I've got a good amount of capital and I need to continue to grow, especially if I have, some financial stakeholders that I need to appease and continue to demonstrate growth, and I cannot do that via construction, well, the only way that I can do that is by either purchasing facilities or doing mergers. And so we're starting to see this, especially in the big operators. I'm sure you guys have seen, like Public Storage, for example, has had two massive record-breaking deals in the last, at this point, only 6 months, and it's, two deals in the billions of dollars. So we're seeing that in a lot of other different scales, to be clear. We're seeing this both in terms of the actual record value of transactions, but also in the number of transactions that are being executed. So this is one that continues to play out over the last calendar year, and we expect it at least for the next 6 months, if not more. But today's conversation in particular, I want to focus on this concept of shift to digital. So I want to kind of start by demonstrating what I mean by the shift to digital here. So 2 data points that I want to share with you guys. Both of these are coming from our internal Storable data, and we've anonymized this and put it at scale so that you guys can just get a feel for, across the industry, across the entire country, what kind of behaviors are we seeing in this digital space. So the first one that comes to you from the Sparefoot marketplace. So for those that are not familiar, Sparefoot is a marketplace that connects tenants who need storage with operators who have available units. And it is an online marketplace exclusively. And so what we're seeing here on this chart is a breakout of demographics by age in particular. So you can see those breakouts on the x-axis here at the bottom. But the general idea is that, looking at the year 2019 compared to the year 2020, so pre-pandemic to the first year of the pandemic, you're seeing the percentage increase of usage of the Sparefoot marketplace by age demographic. So a couple different things obviously pop out, right? One is 18 through 24. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this is the college crowd. If you think back to March, April, May of 2020, there was a whole lot of folks that thought they were going to be going to college that year that had already moved in, who all of a sudden had to go back home. Dorms were being closed, universities were being closed, and we see a massive increase of people in that cohort. That makes sense. 55 plus is the one that I think is particularly interesting to discuss because, as we all know, we expect kind of the 18 to 24 age cohort to adopt digital forms of engagement. I think it's a little surprising to see just how much the 55 plus cohort did. So you can see here that, almost 40% if you, between the two, if you're averaging out, of people were using this more so than they had used the prior year out of necessity. What's more important, that you won't necessarily see on this chart, I'll just ask you to take my word for it, but over the last year, we've actually seen that these trends are basically staying flat. So we are continuing to see that group of folks that were kind of forced to use these digital forms of engagement, they are continuing to do so. So they're not reverting back to the traditional walk-in traffic or phone-based traffic. And there's another view we can take to look at this to demonstrate that exact point. So this is data that is aggregated from facility management software. In particular, it's SiteLink and StoreEdge, which are 2 of our properties, 2 of the biggest facility management software solutions in the industry. And what you can see here is this is a representation just visually of the percentage of total traffic and where the source is coming from. So walk-in traffic is the one I want to point you to, these green bars up at the top. What you can see is that month over month, starting from, 2019 is kind of what we would expect to have seen. It's a little over 50% pretty consistently. And pretty quickly into the pandemic, right around March, that third bar in 2020, you can see that there's a surge where it drops pretty considerably there, almost to 40%. And it's pretty much stayed steady since then. We've had a couple of months that start dipping a little bit more, but folks are replacing that with mostly this orange bar, which is your website traffic, your marketing website traffic. There's a little bit of splash of Sparefoot in there too, both of which are digital formats there. So folks are starting to walk away from walk-in traffic, that pun was not intended, and they are trying to move towards these digital forms of engagement. So I want to get into kind of what are we here to discuss today now that we've kind of talked through, why is the digital experience important and just kind of demonstrating what we're seeing there in the industry. So today we're going to be having a conversation on access control, and in particular, how can you use access control solutions to be able to go then meet those customers that we just talked about that are wanting these digital experiences? How can you ensure that that product line is positioned to be able to help you meet those evolving digital needs that we're already seeing from our tenants? We're also going to be following it up next month with an operator roundtable where we're going to be hosting a couple of operators that are really savvy in this space that are doing some really forward-thinking cool stuff with access control to be able to talk about how they're actually taking a lot of the kind of the science that I'm going to be talking about today and translating that into art. How are they actually bringing this to life? And you'll have an opportunity to ask them questions. And maybe if you're having a tough time with something on your access control experience, that'll be a good opportunity to submit your questions and hear directly from some folks that are doing a good job of this today. And then next up is still in this tenant shift to digital, another key product, as we just saw on the slide right before this, is the marketing websites. That's another really important way that we can meet those evolving digital needs. So in March, we're going to be having a conversation on that. But I want to jump into today's conversation. So I think that it's pretty clear that we are seeing tenants are shifting to digital, operators need to be shifting to digital. That's what we've been discussing so far. But I do think it's still a fair question to just ask, why access control, right? So, you know, traditionally, access control has been a, So, you know, traditionally, if you think through kind of your walk-in traffic and phone-based operations, maybe of 2-3 years ago, your frontline manager, your frontline manager was very, very likely the person that was traditionally responsible for creating kind of a memorable first impression, right? Now, if you start thinking about what happens when traffic is being diverted almost exclusively through digital, or at least more so through digital, your access control experience is often the one that's responsible for creating that memorable first impression. And so even worse than that, on top of the first impression, is that if you're having a bad experience with it, maybe you're working with a tenant who did a contactless move-in, they haven't even spoke with you before, and they're having gate issues on day 1 or day 2 or day 3, who do you think they're going to blame, right? They're not going to know to blame your access control provider. They're going to blame your company, and that might be a tenant that ends up turning. So it's super critical that you get access control right to be able to meet the needs of your tenants. But there's also a lot of benefits from an internal operations POV. And we're going to be diving into both of these concepts here in just a moment. But I do want to start real quick with just an overview of the fundamentals of access control, because one thing I will say I hear a lot from operators is that access control is thought of as a monolith, just meaning, you know, there is access control is just one thing, and there is no, you know, multiple different things that can go right or go wrong, or things that can get better or whatnot. And so fundamentally, there's just, goodness, there's 3 main components of an access control experience, right? You have your credentials reader, which is typically your keypad or some sort of card swiping mechanism, key fob mechanism that sits either at your gate or at the front of your building. You have a component that's called a controller that will sit at your, typically in your office. This is just typically a box of hardware that connects to the internet, and then it's also wired back to all those different access points. But most importantly is that you have your software. And so the reason that I flag this is that almost every access control provider out there has software. In fact, in the storage industry, as far as I know, all of them do. There are some offline solutions, but nowadays pretty much every vendor has a software component. But there is a variety of ways that you can impact your software in the way that it can, you know, have an impact on your business as well. And so as we think through, you know, picking the right vendor for the job, because ultimately these things need to work in unison for you to be able to kind of meet your unique needs for your business. There are different types of vendors that take different approaches to this problem. And so most vendors approach this in one of 2 ways. They are either a hardware-focused vendor or they are a software-focused vendor. And to be super clear, there is no right answer here. It is very important that you, as an operator, are thinking about the unique needs of your business and what you're trying to solve for, what you'd like to be able to get out of it, for you to make the right decision as to which one is right for you. So what I want to get into in this next section of the presentation is to discuss exactly that. I want to just be able to kind of talk you guys through, what does a hardware-focused vendor provide? What does a software-focused vendor, oh my goodness, software-focused provider give you, so that you can make the right decision for your business. So let's start with the hardware-focused providers. So I want to get one thing out of the way really quick, which is just to say that what I am not saying here is that hardware is only going to be important if you move with a hardware-focused provider. To be super clear, even for a software-focused provider, you have to make sure that you are getting reliable, high-quality hardware, or else you're going to be introducing yourself to a massive amount of headaches. You're going to be kind of having to rip and replace all kinds of different components over the years, and you're going to end up spending a lot more money, especially if you go the cheap route, like right up front. So it's important that you are picking a vendor that, you know, creates high quality, reliable experiences. And so that is something I would encourage you to speak to, no matter which vendor, is kind of what is the track record of that hardware and how did they think about that. What I am talking about, though, to be clear, is that whenever it comes to actually innovating and trying to create new value for operators, there are folks that are trying to do that new value and continue to push forward either on the hardware or the software side. And so typically when it comes to hardware, there's kind of two main reasons that I think operators should potentially contemplate this approach. One is if you have a unique, nuanced configuration. And so what I mean by this is, we'll go through some hardware components here in just a moment, but the idea is that there are certain people who their facility is not the exact same as somebody else's, and they might need a very, very specific piece of hardware to accomplish something they're doing. So whether they're an unmanned operation or whether they are maybe a rural location that can't get hardwired internet, there's a variety of reasons why, even if you wanted to go with a software-focused provider, it just wouldn't make sense. You've got to go with somebody who can meet the unique needs of your business before you could even get something implemented. But number two is this concept of impressive first impressions. And I would actually change that a little just to say impressive impressions in general. So there's a lot of folks who are trying to come across as this, we have heavily invested in the technology at our facility so that that our tenants are impressed by kind of what we have going on, and they feel like that, their money is well spent because the operator is clearly investing that same amount of money into it. And so I want to break down what some of these components are that some of these folks are using in the hardware focused side of the market. Number one is video access points. So, this one's been in the industry for a while. I think this one's pretty well understood. But the idea is that you can simply embed a camera directly into things like your keypad or your intercoms, any part of your access control solution, so that you can get a snapshot or a video of someone as they are accessing. So the use case here is oftentimes security oriented. So you can imagine if you had a break-in reported one day, you can kind of go back and figure out who accessed the facility last night, reference kind of some of those video logs or any snapshots taken, and understand who that person is that might have been responsible for that issue. Two is two-way intercoms. And so this is more kind of an efficiency play for folks. And so, maybe you've got a real big facility or you have multiple buildings and you don't want to have your tenant have to go back and forth between your climate control building and your main office. You can give them a way to just communicate directly via this intercom system that's built into your access control solution. Three is cellular connectivity. And so this is the one I was referring to when I was talking about if you don't have internet access. So there's actually a couple different reasons. I mentioned rural being one issue where you might not have a consistent, reliable internet connection, in which case cellular might be your only option. But another really common one we hear from folks is that you might not have pre-run wire whenever you were doing construction of the facility, or maybe you acquired a facility that never had ran wiring from your gate back into the office. And so to have to go in there and trench and tear up a whole bunch of pavement and potentially not have folks access the gate for a while. I mean, it's a big headache and it's not, very reasonable for a lot of folks. So, things like cellular connectivity where your device just goes and reaches straight out to the cell tower instead of having to have a hardwired internet connection can be particularly valuable for those types of folks. And the next three are actually all kind of bundled. And so the idea here is that there's a couple different use cases you're solving for, which is mostly tenant convenience, but there is an additional layer of security in some of these too. But the idea is that there are some hardware-focused providers that are starting to innovate in the way that you interact with a reader, right, an access point. So whether that's proximity-based or whether that's Bluetooth-based, the idea is as simple as, you might have a phone, for example, on the Bluetooth example that will, automatically kind of pair with a gate as you're driving up to be able to understand that this is indeed the person that is, in good standing, they're not delinquent, and we can go ahead and open the gate for them and move them in. And then biometric is interesting. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because this is more of definitely like you probably won't see a lot of this in the next couple of years in the storage industry. But the idea is that it's kind of a second form of authentication where maybe you do a fingerprint or a retinal scan to be able to also verify your identity and make sure the right people are coming into your facility and the wrong people are being kept out. So software-focused providers, by contrast, they're typically focused on using the power of like technology and some automation and stuff like that to be able to simplify your internal operations and to create a really, really solid experience for your tenants. But there's another layer that I also am going to be referring back to over the next couple of slides, which is that, there are folks that are creating innovative software that's doing some cool stuff, but there's also folks that are going even a layer deeper than that in the industry, which is this concept of embedding your software, your access control software into your facility management software. And so what I mean by that is that, today a lot of people are having, one version of their software they have to log in with a unique set of credentials. Sometimes it has to be on a computer that sits in the office. And then you also have your facility management software that you're doing all of your operations and your marketing, et cetera. So by embedding these two and connecting them directly, it just creates one more simpler way for you to run all of your business out of a single place. But it also creates incremental efficiencies that you could not achieve by having two separate ones. And so I'm going to be calling back to that concept and walking you through exactly what that means here in just a moment. But ultimately, there's two main outcomes that I want to be discussing with you guys today that the software-focused providers are trying to achieve. One is the concept of enhanced operational efficiency. And so what I'm referring to here is your internal operational efficiency. So, whether you're just kind of a one-man or a one-woman show that's, doing everything day to day, or whether you have a management team or whether you have district managers, depending on your scope and size, you're probably wanting to know how you can simplify your operations so that you can focus on things that are much more important than just resetting a gate code, for example. So we'll go through kind of how these folks can achieve that for you here in a moment. But number two is this optimal tenant experience. So we talked about the shift to digital. We talked about how tenants are preferring these online forms of engagement more than they ever have before. So it's super critical that by using a software-focused provider, you can meet those needs and create some innovation that they have never been able to experience before. So let's start with the operational efficiency piece. So one of the biggest pains that we hear from operators is the fact that just how much time, raw time, they have to spend either managing or configuring, or most importantly, troubleshooting access control issues. And so I focus on the troubleshooting because by far the most common use case we hear is that if you're using a locally installed set of software to run your operations, then there is a pretty good chance if your gate goes down, someone has to physically be there. And if that's during your office hours, all right, not the end of the world. It's still a pain, but you go reboot your system. You got to do what you got to do. But if you're, at home, then you got to now make a trip to the office just to be able to get a tenant in. Or worse, if you're on the beach in Cancun or wherever else you're vacationing, this is probably going to be a real big pain in the butt, and it's probably going to result in a churn of some of your tenants, or at least some unhappy experiences. So by integrating this by going with cloud-based solutions, what this allows you to do is that you can manage, configure, and troubleshoot your access control solution from anywhere that you can access your facility management software. And so that is definitely a big convenience win for you as an operator. Number two is integrated access logs. And so this one is probably more important than ever. We talked about the supply crunch a moment ago, right? Where so many people are at 90% occupancy. And folks are looking for a way to continue growing their bottom line that isn't just getting more tenants in the door, because you can't, you're full, right? So integrated access logs are really interesting because you can go straight into your facility management software and you can see all of your access data points side by side with all of your other data points that you're used to seeing from an operational POV. So we'll go through this one a little bit more here in a moment. But where this is interesting is that folks can use this data to inform business decisions such as revenue management, which is so important when you're at 90% occupancy. So, whether there's ways you can approach that, but basically whether someone, goes into their unit a lot can really help inform whether or not you want to raise a price on them or not. Different theories on that. We won't go, dive too far into that, but it is definitely a valuable data point for you to have. Next is access points and groups and hours. And so what I mean by this is that not every single tenant, needs the same level of access, whether that's by hours or whether that's by portions of your facility, right? So, maybe you have some drive-up units, maybe you have some RV parking, and maybe you have a climate-controlled building. The folks that are in your climate-controlled building don't necessarily need to have the same, they probably need to have more access. They need to be able to access that building. Your RV folks, they don't need to get into the climate-controlled building. They're not renting a unit there. And then also hours are important too. So those different groups of people, maybe you're comfortable having someone access their drive-up unit after your office hours, but you don't want them in your building for one reason or another. This is something that you can do via software. So a lot of the hardware-focused providers just kind of treat that as a monolith, and it's just like you can access 9 to 5, and everyone accesses the same way. The software provides you the opportunity to be able to kind of navigate that and to be able to put people in these groups that give them certain levels of access. There's also another common use case here is maintenance staff. So maybe you want your maintenance staff to have 24-hour access so that they can go, help clean up or troubleshoot an issue after hours, but you don't want all of your tenants to be able to do that. And this empowers you to do that. And so embedded providers, one thing to, we talked about how you can connect this to your FMS. Another kind of benefit you get out of that approach is that all of that can be done automatically. So if you think about your traditional move-in flow, you're going to be like if you're moving a brand new tenant in, you're selecting which unit that they are going to be moving into. And so the facility management software knows that that's a climate controlled unit, for example, and it can put them in the right group automatically. And then automated lockouts is another one I would cover, and this one actually dips into the tenant experience as well. But the idea here is that because we know with your facility management software, when someone becomes delinquent, we can automatically lock them out and make sure they don't have access. And by contrast, when they make a payment, we can automatically re-grant them access. And so that's a huge operational efficiency. And we hear from operators that they spend a lot of time managing collections and delinquency. This is a great way for you to get around that. The other thing I would add here, for the folks that are using a provider that embeds into the FMS, an additional layer you can implement here is that if someone tries to access a unit and they're delinquent, maybe they don't know they're delinquent. They don't know that they haven't paid their bill. We can trigger an automated SMS or an email that goes directly out to them that says, hey, we saw you try to access the facility. No problem, but you're a little bit behind on your payments. Tap right here and we'll take you to an online account management tool and you can make a bill pay. And as soon as they make a bill payment, boom, they're right back into the facility. So that's one less call that your operators or that your managers have to take, one less trip to the office for your tenants. But it's also important we're talking about the tenant experience. So, we just talked about automated collections workflows, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. That one goes hand in hand with the operator piece. So this is a benefit both for your internal operations and for your tenants. If you think through their POV, they don't want to have to go turn around, park, go into the office. Maybe your manager's working with someone already, wait in line. They'd love to be able to just tap a link, boom, make a payment, they're back into your facility. And then account management tools is another one. We referred to that just a moment ago as well. But the idea is that access does have a very, very direct connection to your ability to, or whether you are delinquent or not. And so being able to log into your account and make a payment, but also to be able to reset your gate code or to be able to just understand what it is, maybe just go reference it in case you forgot it. This is one less thing that your managers have to manage and your tenants can do it automatically. The third is online move-ins. And so this one is critical because based off the data that I showed at the beginning of today's presentation, both Spearfoot and your marketing websites are seeing increased traffic considerably over the last few years. So it's super important that you have your access control experience embedded directly into that online move-in flow so that your manager doesn't have to get manually involved, right? Again, we're talking operational efficiency, but for this, it's a tenant experience thing. If I'm doing an online move-in and I don't want to have to go into an office or I don't have to jump on the phone, I should be able to just get my gate code as part of that online move-in experience, as well as the clear instructions on how to access my facility. And then lastly is mobile access. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the nuances of this one, but the general idea is that everyone's got a smartphone, right? And so if you are not giving them the ability to take their cell phone and to be able to have that as a way to grant access to your facility, then that's something you should definitely be thinking about, right? So you can either do this, some providers are doing this by text, where you just text like a code to a certain phone number and boom, the gate will open right back up. Others are doing it in ways like Bluetooth we discussed before, where there's an app that you have on your phone and it connects automatically to the gate. It knows you're driving up and it'll open the gate as soon as you arrive. But it's going to be, I think this is one in particular that we'll see a lot of innovation on in the next 2 or 3 years. It's really in its kind of infant state here in the storage industry in particular. One last little group, I kind of want to give you guys some bonus ideas here, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but a lot of what I've discussed so far is what is available today in the access control industry. But as I mentioned at the top of the call, I'm also always looking at, what are some parallel industries that are similar to access control, and what are some of the technologies that we might expect to see in our industry over the next couple of years. So number one is continued investment in the cloud and edge. So today, the storage industry still is kind of stuck in a place to where they're relying on computers being installed in their office to be able to address those needs. And we're starting to get towards the cloud. But that investment is only going to continue, and you're going to be able to run more and more of your business exclusively off of a mobile device or an iPad, et cetera. Or also this concept of edge, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about this, but the idea is that eventually your hardware that's installed at your facility can kind of self-compute, and it won't need a lot of help from software, and it will be able to understand what are the unique needs of your business. And even if you have something like an internet connection go down, you'll have redundancy built in to where that thing can keep running itself. Another is multi-factor authentication, and this kind of plays into the biometrics thing I talked about a moment ago. But the idea is just you might need an additional layer of security. That's going to continue to become more and more important. So you're going to need to provide not only, for example, a passcode, like a 4-digit passcode like you traditionally have, but the problem with that is it's very easy for me to guess that, or for me to, have that stolen or you know, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not really a way to verify that that person is who they are. So by providing a second form of authentication, typically biometric, then you can really assure that person is exactly who they say they are and let the good guys in, keep the bad guys out. Security system integrations is another one that we've started to see in the early days of the self-storage industry, but ultimately access control is just a form of security for your facility. And it will continue to be so, and we'll start seeing it integrate into other forms of security software so that you can truly get a comprehensive view of what is going on at your facility at all the time, be able to diagnose security-based issues, and quickly get answers that you need to be able to help with any form of those. We also talked about business intelligence a moment ago about, you know, I gave a really kind of trivial or just an easy example of how you could use, for example, usage metrics to inform whether or not you want to levy a price increase. But there are a host of other ways that you can use access control data to inform all kinds of different business decisions. So by integrating, you know, your access control and by embedding it directly into your FMS, you're setting the groundwork to be able to have all of your data in one place, to be able to pull all of these unique insights out and make sure that you're making the right business decisions to continue growing your bottom line. And then lastly, smart buildings. So the idea here is pretty simple, right? If you think about your home, at least a lot of folks nowadays, they've got an Alexa connected device or a Siri connected device that you can tell it to turn off the lights or turn up the music or yada, yada, yada. But the point is all the different hardware across your house is able to talk to one another, learn from one another, and can kind of work with one another. And this is the future of the self-storage industry as well. So we're not quite there yet, but in the next couple of years, I think you're going to see a lot more investment in kind of all of these different hardware systems speaking to one another. And so you have this one much smarter, coherent system that is able to help you increase the security of your facility and create an awesome tenant experience, but also just reduce the operational complexity there at your facility. And so as we guys discussed, you know, the tenant shift to digital, supply crunch, labor shortages, growth re-M&A, these are kind of the four main forces. But shift to digital in particular is the one that we're focused on right now. And so we appreciate you guys, you know, joining us today for a conversation on access control, talking about how, you know, all of these different tenants and operators are starting to shift towards these forms of digital engagement. And it's super critical that access control in particular is one that you're contemplating to make sure that you're meeting those needs and simplify your operations. But as we discussed before, we've got a couple different more discussions we want to continue to have on this topic of shift to digital. Next month, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be hosting some operators who really know what they're talking about, some savvy operators to be able to discuss this and continue it further. And we want you to be able to submit your questions, kind of understand how can you implement these things directly at your facility. But we're also going to be transitioning very quickly into a conversation on marketing websites. So as you might imagine, it's one of the single most important ways that you can meet those evolving digital needs, both internally and externally. So we ask that you guys please mark these dates on your calendar. We'll obviously be sending out some communications to you guys as well. But over the next couple months, we're excited to continue that conversation. But without further ado, that wraps us up. So we did have some really solid questions come in, guys. We actually had quite a few questions come in. So we do appreciate this. I actually didn't expect this to take as long as it did. So that is entirely on me, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So what I'm gonna, what I will promise you guys is that I have got everybody's email address and all of the questions come in. Throughout today and throughout Monday, I'm gonna be following up with everyone individually. Thank you guys so much for your engagement. I apologize we didn't get a chance to answer any of these questions, but we really do hope you guys have a good rest of your Friday. Thank you guys so much for attending. This is awesome. Love to see you guys show up. And we'll see you guys next month for an operator roundtable on access control.